You can also take stories from history. Some of them are very long. If you've had to study history in your schoolwork, you know that some of those history books can go on and on and on and on. But you can sometimes pull out one little thing, just one little story that illustrates a point. This is a story that I told to a friend of mine who is a business professor, and he has used it in some of his business classes. And I think it might be useful for some of you as well. Maybe you've heard the name J.P. Morgan. He was a businessman, very successful, extremely rich, an entrepreneur. This was back at the turn of the previous century. And he was so rich and so powerful that there were a lot of people who wanted to get close to him, hoping that he could help them. There was a man one day who came to J.P. Morgan and said, "I would like you to lend me some money." "How much money?" said J.P. Morgan. $10,000. Well, $10,000 is a lot of money, but 150 years ago, it was really a lot of money. He said, "Can you loan me that?" And J.P. Morgan said, "I will not loan you the money." He said, "Why not?" He said, "I will not loan you the money, but I will do something for you that will be more valuable." And the man said, "What is that? I need the money." He said, "Meet me tomorrow at the stock exchange, the center of business and commerce in the country. Meet me tomorrow at the stock exchange, and I will walk with you from the entrance all the way across the floor of the stock exchange. And we can talk as we walk, and people will see us. And they will see that you are with me and that I am giving you my attention. And that will be more valuable to you than $10,000. And it was true. The man later found that that association that everyone had seen with a rich and influential man was worth more than the money he had asked for. So my screen here says, "It sounds like you might have switched to a different language. Have you switched to Korean?" Nope, I haven't. So I can click on that. No, I wish. Of course, these days with Google Translate, you can switch to almost anything, can't you? So there's a small story from history, and it could be history in your country, history in your city. It could be history in your family. And I know that one of the things that we talk about when we're talking about historical stories is that if you have a family and you would like to tell the story of your ancestors, you could tell a story about how you won and you succeeded, and you just rose up and up and up and up. But the most effective family story that you can give to people in your family is what they call an oscillating family narrative. In other words, we did really well and we were lucky, and then we were not so lucky and things went badly. And then we worked really hard and things went better, and then there was a disaster. Because the message that it gives is that your family, or any family, you can face good times and bad times, but you are still there. You have lived through it. Your family has survived through all of that. And those are good stories from your family history or from other history. Because what stories, there are so many stories that resonate with us, stories of disasters and things like that. So I want to tell you a small story from history too. This is a story that happened not many, many, many years ago, but in 1972. It was a dark December night, and there was a Lockheed 1011 jumbo jet. It crashed into a swamp in the Florida Everglades. It killed everyone on board. It killed more than 100 people. But it didn't have to have happened. Here's the story. The strange thing about this accident, and it was one of the worst airline accidents in United States history, but the strange thing about the accident was that There was no storm. There were no outside disastrous influences, no bad weather, and the plane itself was in perfect condition with one minor flaw. It seemed that they were coming in, they were just 20 miles outside of Miami where they were going to land, and everything was on schedule. And then someone noticed in the cockpit, there was one little light that had not lit up, a little green light bulb. And it was to tell some minor detail about their landing. But they were worried about that. Why had this light bulb not lit up? Was there some problem? And so the whole cockpit crew began to concentrate on this light bulb. What could they do? What was the problem? The pilot put the plane into a circular pattern while they thought about what they could do about this light bulb. They couldn't figure out any problem. They couldn't figure out any way to make it light up. But because they were concentrating on that little light bulb that would have cost maybe 20 cents, nobody noticed that the plane was losing altitude gradually. And by the time they realized what was happening, it was too late to pull up. They crashed into the Everglades and all were killed. Because they had been concentrating, they had placed all their attention on the one small thing that was worrying them at the time without thinking about the larger picture, what might be happening. I like that story because I think that very often we concentrate on some tiny, tiny, insignificant detail and miss the larger picture. So that is a story from history. And yeah, I have to look at my time here. I have so many stories that I would like to tell you, but maybe I will just tell you one more. And this is a story from Burma, and it is a story, in a way, it makes an opposite point of one of the other stories that I told you. A king and his ambassador were sitting on a balcony of the king's palace, and they were eating figs and honey, and they talked about strategies, and they talked about alliances, they talked about all sorts of important things for the kingdom. And as they talked, a drop of honey dropped down onto the railing of the balcony. And the advisor said, Your Majesty, there's a drop of honey there. Should we clean that up? And the king said, No, I have servants for that. That's not our problem. And so they continued to talk about treaties and other important things. But the drop of honey dripped down off the balcony and into the courtyard below. And a fly buzzing around saw the honey and landed on the honey. And then almost immediately, a green lizard that was on a nearby rock saw the fly, ran over and gobbled up the fly. Well, at that point, a gray cat that had been sleeping in the shadows of a building ran over and ate the lizard. And a dog that had been nearby saw the cat and ran over toward the cat and began to attack it. And so now there was a cat and a dog that were fighting. And the advisor said, Your Majesty, there's a cat and a dog that are fighting in the courtyard. Should we stop that somehow? And the king said, Oh, no, that's not our problem. But then two brothers, then the dog's owner and the cat's owner came running out, and the cat's owner said, Your dog attacked my cat. And the dog's owner said, Your cat scratched my dog. And then two brothers of the cat owner of the cat and two brothers of the owner of the dog, they came out and they began to punch each other. And after a while, other friends and family members of the owner of the dog and the owner of the cat, they rushed into the courtyard and they began to fight. And some of them had weapons. They had sticks and they had knives and they had all kinds of weapons. And so the police were alerted, and then the army was alerted, and there were explosions and all sorts of things happened as everything escalated. And then the palace caught on fire. and burned to the ground. The king and the advisor, they escaped unhurt, but a couple of days later, they walked into the courtyard and looked and saw the pile of still smoking ash that used to be a really nice castle. And the king said, you know, maybe I was wrong. Maybe that drop of honey really was our problem after all. So there is a folk tale about, and like I said, interestingly enough, maybe it gives you the opposite point as one of our other stories, that they didn't concentrate on something small, and that led to a disaster. Well, as I said, there are all kinds of stories that you can tell that I really enjoy telling you. And so I want you to think about stories that you could tell. Find one somewhere in your life or in your reading or in your conversation with family or business associates or other students, and tell that story in some kind of a gathering. We're used to stories being told at weddings and at funerals, at family reunions, but you know that most people who are pitching an idea in front of colleagues or in front of people that they want to invest in their idea, they will often start with a story. And sometimes if it's a development in the company that they work for, they will begin with a story, maybe the story of how the company, of the company's origins, or the story of the founder of the company, or a story of a satisfied customer. Sometimes you will get letters or notes or in conversations with people who've been satisfied. Those are the best kinds of stories to make your company or your idea look really, really good. So those are some good kinds of stories. Some things to think about. Short, usually, unless somebody invites you to tell a 3-hour-long story. It could happen, probably won't, but it could. Make sure that you've got a clear plot. It may be tempting to just go on and on and on and on and on, but make it something small and well-contained. A beginning, a middle, and an end. So lots of stories start like this. Once there was a person who had a problem, or a person who wished for something, had a dream, and then you begin the rising action of that story. There were setbacks, there were plans, there were successes, there were more setbacks. And finally, you come to a climax, the one turning point, the thing that makes that story a story, the reason that you started that story at the beginning. And then you get the falling action and the end of the story. And the end is really important, because if you've ever known somebody who can't tell a joke, usually their problem is they don't have the last line. So it just kind of said, and then that happened, and well, what? You really need to know the last line of the story. And it's probably going to be how things changed because of the story that you told. After that, we always. After that, we never. After that, people realized. So it's something that happened that changed the person, the environment, the company, the school, whatever it is that you are working on. So I've told you a little bit about how to find a story. How do you work on a story? I wonder if sometime you've been on your way to something and you think in your mind, oh, I could tell them about this thing that happened to me. That's a good thing. And so often you can practice the story if you're exercising, if you're walking, if you're traveling, if you're driving. I often practice stories when I'm driving. Anytime, and if you're with someone else who is a willing listener, you could try it out on them. Although once one of my teenage sons got what he called story canceling headphones. He was tired of my stories. But it's good to practice your stories. And I will say that many people say, read it over and over and over. But I say, You will get much more effect if you say it. There's something about hearing those words coming out of your mouth that fixes that story in your mind much better than reading it many, many times. So pick a story. Here's an example. I say, people who say they don't have any stories, there are two things that I sometimes think about. One is a cooking disaster, or a disaster with food, or another one is a disaster with transportation, car trouble, or any kind of trouble with your bike, or a train, or any kind of transportation. And I'm betting that all of you have stories about those two things. So think about that, try it out, and think about a place where you can tell that story. Stories are life-changing. They stick in people's mind better than charts and better than statistics. Studies show that that is true. And I think that if you incorporate more storytelling in your life, your personal and your business and your educational life, that you too will, in story language, live happily ever after. So those are my stories. I don't know if we have maybe a couple of minutes if you have any questions for me. I know one thing that your professor said, she mentioned that I have many stories on YouTube. They're either under, if you search for my name, or there are a lot of stories that are, if you search for Storytellers of San Diego, there are more stories from me and from other storytellers in my area. And you can listen to those. And because of the magic of computers, you can usually get some closed captioning for that. And that will help you to understand them even better. So thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. I hope the rest of your day is good.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you very much for your wonderful stories with us, sharing with us. Great. Do you guys have any questions before we end? any 질문 혹시 있으시거나 코멘트 있으시면 얼마든지 네 해주세요. 우선 네네. 저기 마이크를 다 켜시고. 그냥 말씀하셔도. 네, 그리고 우리 너무 이야기를 많이 준비해 주셔서 너무 감사하고 이렇게 늦은 시간에 해주셔서 감사해서 한번 마이크 다 끄시고 켜시고 큰 박수를 한번 감사를 전할까요? 네, 같이 한번 써주세요. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
네, 너무 감사합니다.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Listeners.
Help us. Thank you very much.
Welcome. You are certainly welcome to email me if you would like. I know that your professor has given you my email, and you can get me through my website as well. So,
Marilyn, do you mind if I ask them to have a couple of questions if they have?
yes, if you have any questions.
질문 있으시면 얼른 하세요. 너무 늦은 시간이라 오래 못 붙잡고 있거든요. 홍 대표님, 우리 수사모 Hong is a president of storytelling club in our university. So she may have some questions. She's now telling the stories in the library. So let's see. 대표로 네. 오늘 어땠어요? 좀 이해가 됐어요? 이야기를 너무 많이 해주셨어요. 저는 한 2개 정도 했는데 너무
제가
감사해요.
영어, 잉글리시로 스피킹 하기에는 좀 실력이 안 돼서
그래서 제가
죄송하고요.
한 3분 이내 걸로 짧게 해달라고 했거든요. 그래서 짧게
네.
출간하면서 길게 좀 하신 것 같아요. 예, 1시간 정도 다 이야기를 해주셔가지고 네네 너무 감사해요.
뭐 그 스틱 번들이라든가 뭐 이렇게 아는 이소무와 아는 것들을 말씀해 주셔서 좀 들렸고요.
네네.
그 다행히 좀 한 50% 이상은 들린 것 같아요.
네.
근데
혹시
제가
메릴린 쌤한테 질문 한 가지 뭐.
질문까지는 제가
아무거라도 네네 네. 메릴린 why don't you 질문 먼저 하시고 하나만 아무거나 뭐 아무거나 쉬운 질문.
용어는 안 되지만 각색하는 팁이 있다면
질문할게요.
잠깐만요, 잠깐만 기다리세요. 네.
각색하는데 도움을 받는 어떤 팁이 있다면
네. Marilyn, Marilyn, she asked a question about how to craft stories well. Do you have any thing to tell?
Just the things that I was talking about. Make sure that, well, you don't have to memorize it. Memorizing stories is way too hard. It really takes a lot of time. And then if you forget one word, it's easy to get lost. Make sure that you know the first line and the last line. Just the pattern of what, sometimes if you are a very visual person, it can be very helpful to do little cartoon drawings of each part of the story that kind of helps you to keep that in mind. But sometimes you can start in the middle of the story and go backwards and forwards, but it's really so much easier for most people, me included, if you start at the beginning of the story and work to the end, and then make sure. I think it's really, really important to know why you're telling the story, what the effect of that story is, what changes because of the story. So I think just, and depending on who you're telling this to, you can get the basic plot of the story. And then if you want to, you can add more descriptive words, more interesting adjectives. You can add movements, gestures, to make your story more interesting, if that's something that appeals to you. You have to figure out what is the way that you want to tell a story. But yeah, don't,
Thank you
a
much.
lot of times.
Thank you so much.
네, 감사합니다. 한 분만 더 빨리 질문할까요? One more person? 네.
Thank you for your teaching. Your teaching encouraged me. Coming out of your mouth, just one story. Story is a life changer. Very good lesson to me. Understand? Marilyn, do you hear me?
I do hear you, but I
Okay,
don't
thank you.
understand your question.
So I have one question. Between relations between good storyteller and good communicator is different.
A difference between a good communicator and a good storyteller? I think that if you think about the people that you know who are good communicators, almost always they tell stories. Because like I say, you can, and of course, being in a university setting, you know that you need to back up your opinions and your ideas with research, with statistics, with numbers, with charts. But if you only do the numbers and charts, then you may not be communicating as well as if you had a story that then is backed up with research and details. I really think I can't even think of a really good communicator that I know of who does not also use stories. Think about that for a while. See if maybe there are people who are very good at interpreting charts. That part is true. But usually the interpretation of the chart takes sort of the form of a story.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Okay,
Thanks for the
thank you
question.
very much. It's 10 p.m. in San Diego. It's too late. So we have to send her away. Anyway, why don't we have a big applause again to thank you, okay? 자,
Thank
박수
you.
한번 다시 한번 치시고, thank you very much, Marilyn. You
Thank you very
had
much.
a wonderful lecture as well as stories. They are very touched, and I really deeply appreciate you.
I appreciate being able to do this. It's really
Thank
nice
you.
to see you.
And we're gonna see you again, right?
I hope
I'm
so.
gonna invite
Yes.
you. Yes, yes.
Oh,
Okay,
great.
thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you very much.
Good night.
Please have a great night.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Bye.
네. 아, 그래요? 12시?
또
자, 1시간 동안 들으셔서 많이 좀 힘드셨을 텐데, 원래 제가 요청했던 건 거의 한 2개 정도만 이야기를 해주십사 했는데, 정말 너무 많이 해주셔서 너무 감사드려요. 원래는 보통 어디 초대돼가지고, 그 프로페셔널 스토리텔러 분들이 이제 어디 초대돼가지고, 그 프로기 때문에 돈을 받으세요. 그래서 이야기를 할 때 한 2개 이상 안 하세요, 보통은. 그래서 너무 많이 준비를 해주셔서 너무 감사하고, 자, 우리가 시간이, 네, 제가 인터랙션을 좀 많이 가지려고 했는데, 정말 시간이 1시간이, 썸머타임으로 1시간이 넘어가 버렸었어요. 원래는 8시라고 생각했는데 9시이기 때문에, 네, 더 붙잡고 있긴 너무 죄송스럽고. 어때요? 여러분들 좀 들리셨어요? 근데 이야기는 되게 조금 쉬웠긴 했는데. 한번 소감 잠깐 나눌까요? 어려우셨어요? 조금 1시간이 되니까 집중하기가 조금 어려우셨죠? 마이크 켜고, 네, 또 특강을 들으려면 지금 힘드시니까 조금 이야기를 나눈 다음에 제가, 네, 연결을 계속 할게요.
저는
네, 저는,
예, 이번 3학년 편입생인데요.
네, 성함도 말해주시면 좋아요. 네, 네.
정혜란이요.
헤라님, 어떠셨어요?
예.
외국에 안
저는 영어를 놓은 지 되게 오래돼서 그런지 리스닝이 거의 안 되거든요.
거의
예,
안
이거
되는 게 맞습니다. 네, 네.
어떻게 해야지 좀 늘 수 있을까요?
그러니까 리스닝은 많이 듣고 네, 나아지셔야 되는데 오늘은 진짜 원어민이세요. 이렇게 원어민이
네.
1시간 동안 떠들면 처음에 여러분이 한 5분은 집중하실 거예요. 그래서 스토리텔링이 좋은 게 이야기가 끊어지잖아요. 3분, 1분 이렇게 끊어지기 때문에 다시 또 이렇게 집중을 해야 하는데 한 번 집중이 안 되시면 아마도 이게 들리지가 않으실 거예요. 그리고 이게 지금 천천히 하신다고 하고 또박또박 제 생각엔 했지만 서도 여러분한테는 아마 빠른 스피치가 아니었나 싶으세요. 그래서 요거가 이제 유튜브로 나갈 거예요. 그래서 혹시 여러분이 좀 끊어서 반복해서 들어주시고 이게 하나도 안 들려. 나는 정말 아무것도 안 들려 하신 분들은 조금 더 쉬운 영어를 좀 듣는 연습하면서 문제를 조금 푸셔갖고 스스로가 내가 좀 귀가 들리네라고 할 생각을 좀 하셔야 돼요. 그런데 너무 걱정하지 마세요. 여기서 이제 여기 계신 분들이 다 아마도 조금 잘 안 들린다 하는 거를 느끼셨을 거예요. 아무래도. 그래서 여러분들이 좀 목표를 갖고 이 정도는 내가 들을 수 있어야지 라고 하는 목표를 갖고 공부를 하시면 되고요. 아니 다 들리고 영어 다 잘하시면 저희 실용영어학과 왜 들어옵니까? 들어올 필요 없으세요. 오늘도 점심 때 우리 밥 먹은 학우님 한 분이 너무 어려워서 다른 학과로 가려고 막 했대요. 그래서 제가 오늘 잘 오셨다고 이제 그랬거든요. 그래서 여러분이 잘하시면 영어 공부하실 필요 없어요. 제가 가르칠 필요도 없이 하산해라 합니다. 그래서 좀 안 들리시고 뭐 이렇게 도전이 되는 게 당연한 거고요. 그래서 뭐 저한테 또 개인적으로 뭐 교수님 어떤 책으로 시작할까요? 뭐 물어봐도 되고 일단은 2학기에 좀 영어 청취가 좀 있어요. 그래서 그거가 좀 인텐시브하게 청취를 좀 많이 향상시켜라 하는 거가 있는데 일단은 유튜브에 여러분 청취물들이 너무 많으세요. 너무 많아요. 그렇기 때문에 여러분의 귀에 들리는 걸 조금 들리면서 조금 한 100%에서 한 70% 들리고 한 30% 안 들린 것부터 선택을 해보세요. 좀 들려야 재밌잖아요. 그죠? 그리고 문제풀이 하는 그런 사이트들도 많이 있어요. 여러분이 마음만 먹으시면 청취는 원어민 필요 없어요. 그냥 향상되실 수 있어요. 듣는 걸로 문제 푸는 걸로 하시면 되니까. 네. 좀 대답이 됐을까요? 네. 같이 노력합시다.
예,
한 번만 더
감사합니다.
받고 우리
네.
그 다음 특강 하실 분 오신 것 같으니까 조금 쉬시라고 제가 하는 거예요. 화장실도 다녀오시고 한 분 더 받을게요. 소감. 손 들고 뭐 이름 말하고 이렇게 말씀하시면
아까 그
네.
맥 교수님이 스코틀랜드 사람이라고 하셨잖아요.
소리가 왜 이렇게 울려요? 이혁규님 아까 그래서 잘 못 알아듣겠더라고요. 소리가 좀 울려.
컸어요.
거기 끄고 여기 그냥 그 줌으로
네.
보고 얘기하세요. 아까도 우리
네.
김두영 님도 줌으로 안 하고 저 화면을 보고 얘기하니까 뭔 소리인지 잘 안 들리더라고요. 멜린이 못 알아들었어요. 잘 그리고 또, 예, 예. 말씀하세요, 이제.
예, 아까 리스닝 거의 다 됐는데 그 맥피 교수님이 스코틀랜드 그 사람이라고 얘기하셨잖아요.
네, 거기서 왔다 그랬지, 네.
이민자라고 얘기하셨는데
네.
그 아까 쥐를 비유하셨는데 쥐들이랑 그 피그라고 그래갖고 무슨 뭐 얘기를 하시는데 그건 돼지가 아니잖아요.
피그라고는 안 했던 것 같은데, 저도 왔다 갔다 막 하느라고 제대로 못 들었긴 했는데,
피그라고 그랬-
한국에서 사용하는 어떤 그런 물건 같은데 그걸 쪼갰던 쥐가 나와.
그런 해석인가요?
저는 그렇게 알고 있어요.
예.
그러니까 못 알아듣는 거는, 못 알아들었던 거는 우리가 유튜브로 올릴 거니까 다시 한번 들어보시고요. 전체적으로 소감, 지금은 그냥 어땠고, 다음에 솔직히 제가 이번에 동화 읽기를 안 가르쳤잖아요. 다음 학기에도 스토리텔링의 세계 그 강사를 지금 초대하고 있어요. 근데 한 분인가
네.
접수를 했는데, 강사 채용하려고 없어요. 원래는 이 메릴린 교수님을 좀 이렇게 우리 강의를 정통이니까 해달라고 하려고 했는데 뭐 외국인 등록 중이고 여기 계셔야 한대요, 한국에. 그래서 지금 특강만 몇 번 좀 앞으로 더 드릴 거고, 아무튼 이분이 정말 정통적으로 스토리텔링 하신 분이고 저의 멘토예요, 솔직히. 제가 처음 스토리텔링을 접하신 분이기도 하고, 그렇기 때문에 여러분이 좀 오늘 안 들렸다 하는 거는 다음에 또 들으시고 또 반복해서 좀 들어보시고 그렇게 하시다 보면은 조금씩 나아지실 것 같아요. 예, 그래서 이따가 또 이야기하는 시간 갖도록 하고요.